Why hello there, a nice Stow here. I do hope this video finds you very well today, and I'm bringing something a little bit different in a comparison video. I'm going to be comparing the original, or one of the original Sheepdogs, the original I think was a flipper, to the latest variant of the flip Sheepdog, of which there are many. And I'm going to have to go over all that because there's a bit of a rabbit hole. There are a lot of different variants of the Sheepdog, and for some reason they keep making them different sizes. We're going to talk about that real quick, but I'm also want to cap off this video by doing a little bit of a discussion on Kizer knives in general, and want to hear people's thoughts if you would be so kind as to leave those thoughts down below in the comments. While you're there, if you find this video useful, entertaining, interesting, helpful, or anything, and you would like to help out a smaller channel, consider liking and subscribing as well. It'd be nice. I'd appreciate it. And as the channel grows, anything that I manage to get out of the channel is going to, be put back into the channel to keep it going. I digress. Let's get into the comparison here. Old Sheepdog. First of all, there are a few immediately noticeable differences that I actually think are direct improvements and upgrades. So overall, I think that they have actually continued to refine and improve the Sheepdog. I would say that this one is, for the most part, a winner in comparison. You're gonna find when we start talking about Kizer in general that there are a few things that are kind of strange, but if you just look at straight one-to-one for Sheepdogs, it seems like they've made some good design improvements overall. 154 cm blade steel on the original one at $80. Pretty reasonable, pretty appropriately priced. 154 seems to bounce in between the top budget to mid-tier. New one. This one is D2. This is the cheapest variant of the new version. There is also, however, a utility bladed version with replaceable blades. There is a Nitro V variant. This particular one comes in $49, $45-ish, something like that, with the D2. For $70, you can get a Nitro V variant, which that one feels just a little bit more expensive than I would like it to be. I'll be honest. Nitro V is a little bit worse, lower tier than 154 cm, and they're coming pretty close there. But there is also an LMAX variant, which is a more expensive one, though for LMAX, I mean, pretty reasonably priced. They start at $120. They do go up to $139, however, that gets you aluminum scales. That seems to be the major difference there. Otherwise, it's micarta of some sort at the $120-ish range. So, in the original one, let's just talk about all the sizes real fast. There are 5 different sizes of Sheepdog now. You have the original size, which is, I believe, around 3.3 inches of blade. This one right here. You have an XL, which is 3.9. You have a mini, or micro, which is 2.6. Then they came out with the crossbar lock variant of the original one. I think they only come in aluminum. They're at like $120, which is, I mean, okay. It's the same as the LMAX variant, and you're getting 154 cm, but you're getting the aluminum, whereas if you want the aluminum and the LMAX, you're paying $20 more. So, again, pretty reasonable for the most part in price points. But when they first came out with the crossbar lock, I actually considered getting one, but I never actually looked into it because I didn't do it. Apparently, the crossbar lock variant of this, when it first came out in 154 cm, is for some reason 3.15-ish inches of blade instead of just making the 3.3 inch they already had the pattern for. I don't know why. Then, of course, the most recent one is in 2.9 inches, and that's got utility blade shape, drop point, and sheep's foot variants all in the same size. So yeah, you're left with about 5 different size options. I think they're all still available. The micro might not be. That's the only one I'm not 100% sure on. And I mean, I don't know if you'll be able to find the XL. I'm sure it's still out there or around, floating around. So I'll link like the original and the new one, but it shouldn't be too hard to find some different variants if that's what you're looking for. Pardon me, changing of season allergies. I have allergies all the time, but changing of season allergies apparently have to happen too, somehow. All right. So now that we've laid the ground rules of all these different sheepdogs, I want to mention that while both of these knives are very similar to the same thickness behind the edge, of course I can't compare them directly because, I mean, it's not the same blade shape. They both come down to, this one comes down to about 12 to 13, this one comes down to about 13 to 14 thousandths behind the edge at its thinnest. However, I want to say that one difference is this drop point does seem to get thicker faster. Not only does it get thicker faster, it seems to taper and get thicker the further forward you go on the blade. If you actually look at the tips, yeah, the original was considerably thinner and stays that way. For some reason, this gets thicker. Now, is that the case with the new sheep's foot variant? Don't know. Something to be noted, though, however, it is the case on the drop point variant. It's still reasonable, it's still good, it's still a perfectly acceptable thickness, and it gives you a little bit more strength out the tip, technically, so is it a downside? I wouldn't necessarily say so, and it's probably very similar, so if you want the slightly slicier, thinner geometry, you might want to go with the sheep's foot of the new one, but they're pretty good. They're pretty close. I'm not complaining. They have changed their logo positioning. That is an important one, as I don't like logos being on the actual, bevel. They put the new logo up on the flat. I like that. I would have preferred the logo just be the actual logo and not the name, but it's fine. They put the actual logo down here on the pocket clip. I'm not going to complain. It's a budget knife. That's not too intrusive. I think that's another improvement that they've made. The real biggest improvement, in my opinion, that they've made here, while you do lose a little bit of edge, which is not necessarily ideal, they have changed up and restructured the choke up position on this. This one has a very, flat choke up position. While I've never felt like, as long as you know that you're gripping onto the actual micarta scales, you don't usually come too close to the edge. In my experience, I felt pretty comfortable and locked in here. Bigger fingers I could see, however, rotating and feeling like they were going to hit the edge. I think you're pretty safe, and especially considering you've got, just your standard position here. But the new one gives you a much more pronounced and higher choil in relation to the edge, so you're less likely to, go into that edge. So it's I think that's overall a nice change. Of course, bigger hands in general might be stuck with this one because they keep getting smaller for some reason. I definitely think the size and the size options of the older variants was more preferable. Now, there's no real size variants that are dramatically different than these new ones, unless you go with the old ones, or the more original ones. So, I'll give them that. These had more variants. They definitely win that one, but the choke-up position, I do think, is a nice change. It's a nice little structure. It has been done to pretty much the same extent, as far as I can tell, on the sheep's foot variant. You also might notice that there are fewer, facets and swedges and stuff on the drop point. It does seem like the sheep's foot variant keeps most, if not all, of these. Maybe some slight changes, maybe like a little bit less of a swedge. Maybe not even. Maybe it's like identical. It's, hard to tell a little bit from pictures and everything, but for the most part, you do get at the same price, you get a slightly more complex, I guess, blade shape or finish. But, I mean, either one is Either one's fine. One thing that did not get better, however, is the jimping. The original jimping was never great, but it is just like, slightly grippy. It's not like the most grippy. I can definitely still slide on it, but it does have a little bit of a grip feel to it. It does like hug you back just a little bit. This is definitely a downgrade. The jimping is doing absolutely nothing here. Can I say that that's the case for every one of the new variants? No, but it is for the cheapest one a downgrade. That is, I think, one of the only real straight downgrades that I would say. Most of it's, like I said, quality of life improvements, but it is what it is. Scale on handle-wise, obviously the top liner lock would have been the closest comparison, but I got the Foca here in the top liner. I figured I'd experience their top liner lock with that, and I could get the crossbar lock to help with my further comparison in the future to the other knives. Handles, the original one is contoured. This is not. This is the cheapest budget variant, and it looks like the micarta variants, at least the LMAX ones, do look like they're likely somewhat contoured. Maybe they're not, but either way, it's not really super noticeable of a difference because they've rounded the edges here so much, and they've sloped them, that even if it's slightly nicer being fully contoured, this is still super comfortable. So I'm not really going to say it's a terrible thing in the world, and the more expensive variants might be contoured, but this one is not, so there's that. It is, however, offering a reversible pocket clip, which is very nice considering top liner locks and crossbar locks are very, very ambidextrous, whereas liner locks, you can do it, but it's not nearly as good. I will say the top liner lock, despite still being a liner lock, is definitely more ambidextrous than your standard liner lock. So, yeah, that's a nice change. They do... There's no filler tab on this. I want to say, the most expensive variant with the LMAX does get you a filler tab. I don't particularly care about the filler tab as long as it's not, like, bugging me if you've got sharp edges or something, and this is fine. Actual grip is basically the exact same, just scaled down again, which is bad for people who have larger hands. They did go with more of a stock standard clip, I think, pretty universally on all of the variants. This seems to be the budget clip they're going, which is a little bit more reminiscent of the drop bear, which I guess they just continued on. In fact, I think it's the same exact clip on the Foca. So yeah, this seems to be their more standardized clip now. I do like this one better, however, this is still very comfortable. It does have a flat on the end, which I'm not a super fan of. So, I mean, this works in and out of the pocket a little bit better. However, I will say that Kizer does offer up replacement clips, titanium variants and such, that are very similar to the ones that Civivi does, though they're not quite the pocket. They're still folded over, but they're more popsicle stick on the end, but they're not completely... I guess they're still deep carry. It's a nice touch. It seems to be like you can get a different steel clip that has a slightly different shape for about $10. You can get a titanium clip for about $15. Pretty good, pretty reasonable. Hold on one second. So, comparison-wise, I think they've made some very real good improvements here in the new Sheepdogs, or C10C, C01C, whatever. However, there is one, very obvious kind of downside, and that's, again, that they keep getting smaller. You do not have these options in the larger knife, which could make it not as appealing to some people. Fortunately, the original variant is still available, and most of them can be found. Is what it is. They do offer a lot of different micarta options, especially for the Nitro V ones, and they offer micarta and what is it? like aluminum, that's the word I'm looking for these new ones. So you've got a lot of options, but you are stuck to smaller sizes now if you want to get into the newer stuff, which is kind of unfortunate. The real downsides when we're comparing them of the newer one to the older one don't really come in until we start bringing in Kizer as a whole. And that is that this crossbar lock, despite being an adjustable crossbar lock like they've done, is quite a bit weaker. The springs are noticeably weaker than they are, say, on my drop bear here. This is one of the original old variants of the aluminum drop bear, and it is a much snappier, like, you can get it out, but it's definitely not coming out as easy as that. This is definitely mushier, which is unfortunate. Now, could the more premium variants of this new knife be a little bit stronger on the springs? They could, and hopefully they are, but why are they using different springs at all? Like, one of the best things that Kizer did when they came out with their crossbar locks, is, aside from making them adjustable, which they were one of the first to do, they felt like they had, like, detent. They felt like they still feel good. It doesn't feel as mushy as something like, you know, a Benchmade or even some of the other crossbar locks that you might find out there. It does still have that pop. It does still float out pretty well. But it's definitely not as strong of a spring as these original ones were. That was my fault. I was actually on the button there. But this is much more snappy and poppy and feels like it's got an actual detent in there. This, not so much. Now, again, that might just be because this is the most budget variant of this. However, if they're using different springs between different tiers, that would kind of not be ideal. I think they should just use the good springs on all of them, please. Another thing that I've noticed when we're talking about, again, this is just comparison in general, the more recent Kizers that I've gotten have had thicker geometries, like unnecessarily thick geometry. Like this is not an excellent geometry on this knife. This is pretty thick. The Allure, which is the more premium variant, also too thick. Not exactly the most slicey knife in existence. This one, as I said, it does taper and get thicker out front, and it does get thicker going up the blade, but, I mean, right behind the edge is technically about the same. So this one might be okay, but I just noticed that thicker blade steel on 2 out of the 3, at least, of, well, kind of 3 out of 3 that I've tried recently from Kizer. The geometry is just not as good. I mean, they used to have, I mean, well, this is the Doman. This is the sheep's foot Doman. This thing I want them to bring back because this is a wonderful knife. This is hollow ground. This is thin. This is a slicer. Amazing action. Also, they were doing their relief cutout in the back of a blade, which made them, you know, like, super obscenely drop shutty. They did it here on the Bug Glider too, which is also hollow ground and very, very thin. Not doing it on this one. I mean, maybe you don't need to because, of course, you have the button and you can just make it as drop shutty as you want, but the action is still pretty darn freaking amazing, so I'm not going to be like, oh no, they've changed that. And I'm not saying they've necessarily changed that on all their knives. These are liner locks, but just something to be noted. But the more pressing thing is the thickness behind the edge on a couple of their knives, and the weaker springs, because Kizer was, in my opinion, one of, if not the best at doing crossbar locks, and this is amazing. This is too weak. Even adjustable. I've adjusted it all the way up. It's much too weak. And it got that way, like, almost immediately. The one final thing of note that I want to talk about in the comparison tier is, I mean, obviously this is basically the same micarta, right? In fact, it's pretty much identical. Now, I don't know if you can see it off the top and immediately. This one, the old one, is finished better. If you look at the edges here, you can see more, like, tufts of, I mean, this is a really good spot right here. You can see bits of the fabric and cloth sticking out a little bit. Yes, this one's broken in a bit more and everything because I've, had it longer and everything, but it's just finished on the outside slightly better. It's much nicer. You can see on the inside where they didn't touch it up, and they couldn't have touched it up quite the same. You can see the tufts and, like, the material. However, you can see that on the outside edge of this one for some reason. Like, I mean, look right here. See that? Yeah, this one doesn't have any of that other than on the internal edge, and even then it's not, like, egregious, but it's also not something you're going to interface with. The knife just overall feels finished. The micarta feels finished slightly better. The micarta itself still feels of equal quality. They're really, really good micarta. This is, I think, Norplex micarta. All the Kizer's micartas have been always very, very good, even this one, which is quite a bit different than the other ones. But the finishing work is, like, at least on these two, and these two are, like, as direct of a comparison as I can get, just not as good. So I'm just kind of curious to see what other people's thoughts are on that, if they've had the same experience. I'm just, like, they're making good decisions. They're making good improvements and good quality of life improvements. However, if the fit and finish is declining a little bit, that would be a little bit of a concern. Again, micarta fit and finish, blade geometry, and the biggest thing is just how much weaker this is as far as a crossbar lock goes than this very snappy one. It's just, the springs are just noticeably stronger. So overall, if we're looking at design and execution and everything, other than the smaller size, I think that they really have improved the Sheepdog with time. Though, for some reason, they don't like people that prefer larger knives anymore. Right? I don't know what that is, but they have other options that are, of course, larger knives. If that's your thing. Which it is mine, so I prefer the larger knife than the smaller one, but whatever. Overall, I do think they've done some nice, meaningful improvements, and I think they've kept their prices pretty reasonable. So, that's my thoughts. That's everything I have to say, and I will see you guys next time. Let me know your thoughts. What are your experiences with Kizer? I still think they're really good. I still think they're really worth it. I still think they're giving good value. But have you noticed any decline or strangeness? I mean, I can't say they haven't done thick geometries before. This is, of course, a very thick geometry, not a lot of room, but, yeah. Don't know. Want to hear your thoughts. Going to end things here. Say thank you very, 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 very much for watching, and have a great day. See you later.